are going to our today main topic, that is right to seed and intellectual property on rights. And we are very honored that François Meienberg accepted to be our presenters today. François, if you agree, I just want to give some short, a few words about you and your work. François Meienberg in 90s worked as campaign coordinator for Greenpeace Switzerland, and from 87 to 93 was an actor for theatres in Germany, Switzerland, and also for TV, film and radio. From 1999 to 2017, he worked as a campaign coordinator with a focus on agriculture, access and benefit sharing, and intellectual property rights on genetic resources, and for 4 years as joint managing director for the Bern Declaration Public Eye Switzerland. During this time, he was also the co-founder of NGO network No Patents on Seeds and of the Association for Plant Breeding for the Benefit of Society, where he was also engaged as a board member. For many years, he was a member of the Swiss delegation to the COPs of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, or represented the civil society in this fora. Since 2018, he works for ProSpecieRara on policy issue as the coordinator of APBREBES and continues to work as a hiking guide. He has a diploma as chemical laboratory worker, diploma from the Actors Academy, and diploma as hiking guide. He is the author of several hiking books. Thank you, François, to be with us, and the floor is yours for today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Gordana. Thank you to everybody for inviting me. I'm honored, and I have to say I had a lot of this kind of webinars, maybe more in the Asian region or in Africa, but it's the first time also for me to be together with a lot of colleagues and NGO colleagues from Central Asia, and so it's also for me a new experience. Ladies and gentlemen, I will speak about intellectual property rights on seeds. It's maybe a little bit legalistic, and I will do some stops between, so also to allow you to ask questions, and certainly we should have also some time at the end. In my presentation, I will speak a little bit about the very general background on intellectual property. Then the big part of the presentation will be about plant variety protection, so-called breeders' rights, and their impact on farmers' rights and the farmer-managed seed system. I will also speak about patents on plants, especially also what is happening at the European level. So first of all, what is intellectual property? Maybe to start, you see this is my mobile. Now, it's clear this mobile is my property. I bought it in the shop, I paid a lot of money, so it is my personal property. But it's not my intellectual property. I would not be allowed to construct the same mobile and sell it on the market, because this is the intellectual property of Samsung. So I think it's important to understand the difference between my property, about the token, about the physical material, and the intellectual property, which is about the idea which is behind, for example, this mobile. And today we will speak about intellectual property on seeds. Now, first of all, it's important they have been created to support innovation, because normally, you see, intellectual property is a monopoly. They give you the right to be the only one to be allowed to sell this product. And normally monopolies are not a goal for a government to introduce, but they do so because they hope they will promote innovation by giving this intellectual property. Also important to understand, all intellectual property are territorial in nature. So this means if I have a patent in Switzerland, you would be free in Kazakhstan to use it because the patent is only valid in Switzerland. The only problem you will have is when you produce something in Kazakhstan and you like to export it to Switzerland, then you could have some problems because it is protected in this country. Normally, all these property rights have exception. I will speak about this later. But certainly, it's also a thing which has brought to us market concentration. I don't know if you will speak about this later in your policy in e-school, but it's clear the market concentration also in the seed sector today is tremendous. Today, 4 companies, yes, Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, and BASF, cover over 50% of the seed market globally. And there is no doubt one thing which has led to this market concentration are intellectual property rights. And then maybe to end, there is another big push to globalize and harmonize intellectual property. It's clear for the industry it's much easier if they could have an intellectual property regionally or even globally, because this would make their marketing much easier. This slide just to show that more protection is not always better to get more innovation. You see on P, this would be the protection level. So if I protect more and more, if I have more and more intellectual property rights, maybe this could support innovation at the beginning, but when I have a very strong intellectual property right, this could then have a negative impact on innovation. And every government which creates laws on intellectual property should have this in mind. But even more important, when we create intellectual property rights, we always need to take into account other social goals. For example, it should not affect human rights. So if maybe a patent on a medicine limits the access to medicines, then you would have a negative impact on the human right to health. So this needs to be balanced. And when we speak about the intellectual property rights on seeds, maybe there could be a negative effect on the human right to food. But there are certainly other goals: access for farmers, breeders and consumers, the promotion of the national economy, of research, the protection of biodiversity, and especially that the market is still functioning. So all of these aspects need to be taken into account when a country is to draft laws on intellectual property rights. Now, I like to show you what different kinds of intellectual property could affect maybe a plant. So here there is a slide. This is a tomato, which is sold also in Swiss supermarkets. And we have here different intellectual property rights. So for example, when on this package there is a picture, it's clear. This is the intellectual property of the photographer, for example, or from the company who has engaged the photographer. Then in this special case, we have a trademark. So Kumato is not a variety. There are more and more trademarks used to sell fruits or vegetables. So Kumato is a trademark owned by Syngenta to sell these tomatoes. It's quite heavily used also in fruits. Maybe you know Pink Lady. It's a famous trademark for an apple. or jazz. I don't know if they are known in your region, but more and more in Europe, fruits are also sold under trademarks, and that this is a special intellectual property. Then the tomato itself could be protected by a plant variety protection. I will speak about this later. And in addition, there could also be patents on these tomato. Again, I will come back to this towards the end of my presentation. And there is also what we know as a geographical indication. So for example, in Switzerland, we have famous cheese, Sprints or Vacherin Mondor or raclette, which is protected with a geographical indication. But I think important to understand copyrights, trademarks, and geographical indications. They more protect a name. So farmers would still be free to use, for example, this tomato protected with a trademark, as long as they are not selling it under the protected name. It's the same with geographical indication. I could produce exactly the same cheese and I'm free to sell it as long as I'm not using the name of the geographical indication. But plant variety protection and patents, they are directly related to the plant itself and therefore restrict the further use exactly of this plant. Now I will speak about how this intellectual property on plants have started. And the start was long back again. It was in the 1930s, where in the US there has been these first patents on asexually propagated plants. So for example, fruit trees. And then more and more plant variety protection laws have been developed, first in Germany, and afterwards in the 60s, through an initiative by the seed industry, a conference took place in 1961 where 12 European countries participated and the so-called UPOV Convention was adopted. UPOV, important to understand, is an acronym from the French. In French, it's called Union pour la protection des obtentions végétales, so Union for the protection of plant varieties. Now, 7 years later, it came into force after 3 countries have ratified, UK, Netherlands and Germany. And then there was adopted again and again in 72, 78 and 99. There was always a revision of this multilateral agreement called UPOV. And with every revision, breeders' rights have been strengthened and the farmers' space to use these protected seeds has been reduced. I think important to understand when this so-called UPOV Convention, the Act of UPOV 91, was negotiated, UPOV only had 20 members. They were from Europe, Japan, USA, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. So it's important to see, it's totally different to all negotiations under the United Nations, where more or less all countries participate. So for example, when we have negotiated Convention on Biological Diversity or the International Treaty of the FAO, everybody has been in the room. But when UPOV has been negotiated, only 20, mostly European countries, have been on the negotiation table. This means UPOV was never developed to be a global system. It was developed for countries like Europe, Japan, US, where the seed industry plays a very important role, where most farmers get the seed from the formal sector. And the agricultural practices which are prevailing in developing countries or in countries in transition have never been taken into account when this system of intellectual property has been developed. Now, as I said, it was quite a small multilateral agreement with 20 members, but this has changed suddenly when the so-called TRIPS agreement of the World Trade Organization has been adopted. TRIPS mean the Agreement on Intellectual Property Rights under the World Trade Organization. So, and the sentence, the important sentence in this TRIPS agreement is in Article 27.3b, which says that all members of the WTO shall provide for the protection of plant varieties either by patents or by an effective sui generis system or by any combination thereof. It's important also to see they don't mention UPOV, so total freedom to design a plant variety protection system that suits their individual needs. Also important to understand that least developed countries have a transition period and do not need to implement this requirement until 2034, which maybe will be renewed again. So this is the coverage of the WTO. And you see, the amazing thing here is when this TRIPS agreement has been adopted and it has required WTO members to have a protection system for plant varieties, only 20 countries, as I said, Europe, Japan, US, Australia, New Zealand, had already a protection system, an intellectual property system for plant varieties. In all the other countries, there was nothing. So therefore, there has been a big pressure on these countries to implement very fast a protection system for plant varieties. And because there has already been in existence this UPOV system, many joined UPOV between 94 and 99. And the reason is that they knew under the Act of UPOV 78, there was a better protection for farmers' rights, which has been deleted under the Act of 91. I will come back to this. And they knew when UPOV 91 comes into force after a certain number of parties have ratified, there will be no longer a possibility to ratify the older act, which is maybe better for their situation. Therefore, a lot of countries rushed, especially from Latin America, to join UPOV 78 before the Act of 91 came into force. Other countries have been forced to ratify UPOV 91 because of free trade agreements. But there have been a lot of other countries, for example, Zambia, Zimbabwe, India, Ethiopia, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Pakistan, and many others, which said, no, we will not join UPOV, we will draft our own law, which fits to our circumstances. Indonesia was one of these countries, and just recently, they wrote back to the Special Rapporteur on the right to food that they will not accede to the UPOV 91 to ensure the policy space to protect smallholder farmers' seed systems and plant genetic resources. I think this is a very important message from a country which has decided to not join UPOV 91 to better protect the smallholder farmers. Today, this is the map of UPOV. You see in red the countries which are member of UPOV 91, so the strongest, I would say, intellectual property rights on seeds. Then the parties in green are members to UPOV 78, which allows countries to better protect farmers' rights. You see, more or less, with the exception of Peru and Panama, everybody is still with UPOV 78, although they had the possibility for 30 years to join UPOV 91, but they decided to not do so. Especially interesting also China. Today, China produces over 50% of all plant varieties protected under UPOV. So they have, in a way, a very, very strong seed research and industry, but still they are member of 78. Another example is New Zealand. New Zealand was not allowed to join UPOV 91 because they have an agreement with the Maori, so they're indigenous people in New Zealand, which does not allow to join UPOV 91. What is the difference? So, first of all, one difference is on the UPOV 91, you need to protect all plant species. On the 78, you are allowed to do so as you like. The requirement for protection is the same. A variety which needs to be protected is to be new, distinct to all others, uniform, so homogeneous, and stable. As we know, a lot of farmer varieties will fail to achieve these requirements because they are maybe not homogeneous enough to be protected under this law. The duration gets longer, but then there have been other ones. But the main thing is the scope of breeders' rights. You see, formally, and the law which is still valid in a lot of countries in the global south, UPOV 78, the intellectual property right, so the scope of the breeder's right, was about the production of seeds for purposes of commercial marketing. And under UPOV 91, it's all production and all reproduction and multiplication which needs the consent of the breeder. So this means on the 78, a farmer, as long as he has not sold the seeds on a commercial scale, he was totally free to do whatever he wanted. He was allowed to have farm-saved seeds, to exchange the seeds with his neighbor, and so on. But because under UPOV 91 the whole production was under the breeder's rights, this is not possible anymore. So what they have done to a little bit balance this new very broad scope of breeders' rights, they have implemented a so-called farmer's privilege in this UPOV convention. And you see, it's a very legalistic language, but it says that a country, even under UPOV 91, is allowed, within reasonable limits and subject to the safeguarding of the legitimate interest of the breeder, to restrict the breeder's right to permit farmers to use for propagating purposes the protected variety. But what this sentence means is important to understand. So they speak, you are allowed to propagate as a farmer the product of the harvest. So only if the product of the harvest is also the propagation material, you are allowed to do so. This means you may be allowed under your national law to propagate rice or wheat, because here the wheat grain and the rice grain and maybe also potatoes, these are the product you are harvesting and at the same time the propagation material. But it's evident that for fruits or for most vegetables, for example for carrots, you don't use the product of the harvest for the next seeding. So you are not using the carrot or you are not using the apple to multiplicate the plant. Therefore, it's prohibited for all plants where you are using something else which is not the product of the harvest. And there is also this sentence which says you are only allowed to allow farmers to propagate material within reasonable limits and subject to the safeguarding of the legitimate interest of the breeder. What does it mean? This means that after a certain, maybe, acreage you are planting, even if the farm-safe seeds are grown in your field and are resown in your field, you need to pay royalties, license fees to the breeder. And it's also quite clearly written that you're only allowed to use the plants you have propagated on your own holdings. This means the exchange and sale is prohibited in principle. So to make it short, on the UPOF there is a very, very narrow farmer's privilege which only allows the propagation and only for your own use for a certain list of crops, and even in this case, in certain circumstances, you need to pay. So how is this implemented? I like to show you the example of Germany. So here, every year, farmers receive a kind of questionnaire by an umbrella organization representing breeders' organizations, breeders' companies. And farmers are asked, tell us how much farm-safe seeds you have produced. And they fill out the form and they receive an invoice to pay for their farm-safe seeds of the protected varieties they have produced on the farm. And now sometimes even purchasers of agricultural products, so maybe mills, are also asked to prove that the farmer has paid for the farm-safe seeds. Now there is another exception in UPOF which says, this protection does not extend to acts done privately and for non-commercial purposes. But it's defined very, very narrowly. So it says, when you are a farmer and the propagation of a variety is exclusively for the production of a food crop to be consumed entirely by the farmer and the dependents of the farmer living on that holding, then you're allowed to do so. But you see, it's extreme. I always say, if my grandmother is not living in my household and I invite her for a dinner, I would be in contradiction with UPOF 91. So what is the impact of UPOF? And I think the most important impact is really on national sovereignty. We have produced a study, which is also on our website. You see, UPOF is very rigid when you like to become a member, because the UPOF Secretariat and the Council is analyzing every word in your plant variety protection law, and only if it's fully compliant with the UPOF Act, you will be allowed to become a member. We have compared these procedures with other international agreements, and there is no other instrument all over the world that requires new members to adopt the agreement so rigidly into national legislation. So even the WTO and other agreements, for example under the World Intellectual Property Organization, do not have such an inflexible system, and I will show you in a second what this means. And another thing is, it's very unfair. I like to provide an example from Switzerland. You see, Switzerland has already been before a member of UPOF 78, and then we decided to ratify the Act of UPOF 91. But because we already have been a member, nobody checked our law. And now it's clear, because Switzerland is not asking any payments for farm-safe seeds, our law is not in line with UPOF 91. So although we are member of UPOV 91, for example, when Kazakhstan like to copy our law, they would not be allowed to become a member. And it's even the same for the US. The US is a member of 91, but they had still a quite clear article in the law about the right to farm safe seeds. So when Kazakhstan would copy the law of the US, they would not be allowed to become a member. So it's an extreme unequal treatment for current members and for new members. And I'll show you what this means. Malaysia was interested to become a member of UPOV. And they sent the law to UPOV to be analyzed, to see if the law is compliant. And then they got a response by the council, and Malaysia had a sentence in the plant variety protection law which says, we allow any exchange of a reasonable amount of propagating material among small farmers. And in Malaysia, in the law, a small farmer was defined with the farmer having less than 0.5 hectares. So it's a very, very small farm. But UPOV told Malaysia, if you like to become a member, there is no way, you need to delete this sentence in your law. They had another sentence speaking about the sale of farm-safe seeds in situations where a small farmer cannot make use of his own farm-safe seeds due to a natural disaster should be allowed between neighbors, for example. Again here, UPOV said, if you are not deleting this sentence, you will not be allowed to become a member. They also had other things in the law which UPOV has not liked. They had the protection of farmer varieties, although with other criteria. This was rejected. Other the disclosure of the source of the material used, so in a way to combat biopiracy. This also needs to be deleted. Now, what is the impact, for example, on farmer seed system? And here it's interesting, a study made by the World Bank. It was drafted by an expert called Niels Lowers from the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, which afterwards was also the head of the Dutch breeding industry, Plantum. And they said very clearly, these intellectual property rights may reduce the effectiveness of the farmer-managed seed systems by limiting the saving, exchanging and selling of farmer-produced seeds of protected varieties. And another study made by the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation from Germany was very clear, and the recommendation was, if a country has not joined UPOV, consider opting for an alternative to allow for more flexibilities to meet the obligation and also to meet human rights you need to implement. Also, the United Nations Development Programme very clearly said UPOV 91 is not adequate for developing countries, and if you are not a party, you should not join UPOV, because they favor commercial breeders in an unbalanced way, promoting genetic uniformity, because this DUS standard, so the need to only protect homogeneous varieties, and you also have no possibility to fight against biopiracy. And they say, you see, the idea to have a one-size-fits-all approach on an intellectual property right is wrong, because it's clear the agricultural system in Tajikistan is not the same as in Germany or in the Netherlands. And therefore it's more as logic to develop different policies, because you have a different interest. This graph, I think it's always very, very important for me to show how these two systems, so the formal one and the informal one, are working together. Here I don't know if you see my cursor, the outer circle shows the formal seed system. See, they have genetic resources, they breed, they release, they multiply, and they market. And the inner circle shows the farmer-managed seed system, or as you may say, the informal seed system. Now, important to understand are these arrows here. So there is an arrow going from the informal seed system to the formal seed system. And it's quite clear, this arrow shows us that also breeding companies, multinational companies, are using genetic resources coming for the farmer-managed seed system. You see, all our gene banks, but also the big gene banks of the CGIR, the Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, or the Rice Research Institute in Mexico, they are full of farmer varieties. And it's clear that this access to this genetic diversity is important for the formal seed system. And they received this access through the Standard Material Transfer Agreement by the treaty. So far, this access, we could say, is for free and very easy. And they have no, or nearly no, problems to use it freely in the formal seed system. On the other hand, we need to be aware that also the farmer-managed seed systems, from time to time, like to have access to genetic material from the formal seed system. For example, maybe also from breeding made by national research institutes. But in this case, so if this arrow coming from the formal seed system to the farmer seed system, if this arrow, for example, is under a plant breeder's rights on the UPOF, then in this case, you are not allowed to use it freely, because you are not allowed to exchange, to do your breeding, and so on. So for example, mass selection, to be able to adapt a variety to local circumstances, is not allowed if the variety is protected on the UPOF. So there is a big imbalance. Formal system getting free access for all this material. Farmer-managed seed system has a very, very restricted access and is not really allowed to use it also for further development. And I think also important when we see this graphic is to understand that both systems are innovation systems. It's not only the formal system who creates genetic diversity, it's most of all also the farmer-managed seed system. This is an innovation system we need in our world. And what we have done, I would say, during the last 50 years, we have always created policies to protect the formal seed system. And we see now that there are always a negative impact on the informal, on the farmer-managed seed system, and this needs to be changed. And it is to be changed, for example, now with the United Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, or with the farmers' rights as they are enshrined in the FAO Treaty. I will not speak about this today. I hope in your course you will also learn about these two important multilateral agreements. I switch a little bit because for the time. You see, it is often said that UPOF is important to have a vibrant seed industry, but it's not clear, because there was a big study which has been made comparing 80 importing countries to see if the seed exports are maybe better if you protect this kind of seeds, but there was no evidence that UPOF is providing a better import of protected seeds. I have just half a year ago put all this in one in one short brochure, which is also available on our website. Maybe just about the countries maybe you're coming from. UPOV is always publishing a list with which governments they are in touch. And so you see Kazakhstan and Tajikistan are in close contact to UPOV to initiate the procedure for acceding to the UPOV Convention. It seems Tajikistan, there has not been a lot of movement in the last 10 years, but Kazakhstan, as I see it, it's very, very near to accede to UPOV. And if there is somebody here in this round coming from Kazakhstan, please get in touch also with myself and I could provide you more information and we could discuss this issue alone. So, when you like to have more information about the whole question on the plant variety protection, the impact on farmers' rights, please visit the website of APBREBES, where I'm the coordinator of, or subscribe to our newsletter. It's not very often, maybe 4 times a year, so you will get more information. Maybe I have a short stop because I end for the last 10 or 15 minutes speaking about patents. I don't know if there are any questions you like to raise now. If not, we could also speak about questions at the end. But if there are maybe questions really on plant variety protection, maybe this would be an opportunity now.
François, I do not see any raised hands or question in chat.
Okay.
It's better at the end of your presentation.
Okay. So I really hope it's not too abstract, not too complicated. I try my best. Yeah. And I hope the interpreter is still alive. It's a heavy job if you are alone. So congratulations from my side already now. Already, so we go on patents. So patents again is an exclusive right. The owner of the patent again is authorized to prohibit all others from using the patented plant, for example. So here the prerequisites are different. So a plant or an invention needs to be novel, but there also need to be what they call an inventive step. So you see the idea of the invention needs to be inventive. So nobody else should have had the same idea. This is not existing in plant breeders' rights. Again, a patent is only valid in the country which it was granted. And in Europe, but including the Balkan, Turkey, we have the European Patent Office, which has nothing to do with the European Union, where, for example, also Switzerland is a member. Again, in patents, we have this TRIPS agreement, which says what needs to be done, what is the minimum of protection. But they say plants and animals could be excluded from patentability. So there is no pressure in a way from the TRIPS agreement to allow patents on plants. Nevertheless, a lot of countries globally have already inserted patents on plants. What needs to be protected also under the TRIPS agreement are processes, for example, to produce genetically modified organisms. You see, this is the coverage of the European Patent Office. So you see, it's going further than the European Union. And so what could be patented here? And you need to know it's different. And I have to say, I was not able to double check the patent laws of Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan for this. So I'm not aware about the situation in your specific country. But in Europe, we have said plant varieties and animal breeds are not patentable. And when these laws were implemented, also in Switzerland in the 70s, it was clear it cannot be patented the living beings themselves. So this was the interpretation of the meaning that plant varieties and animal breeds are not patentable, because they said, so every plant finally is a plant variety, isn't it? And therefore the plants themselves could not be patented. But this has been changed about at 1999 and in 2000, where a new rule has been integrated in the European Patent Convention. And today they tell us, oh no, you could, for example, patent biological material, for example, a gene sequence which is isolated. Or you also could patent plants and animals, as long as the invention is not limited to one plant variety. So, for example, you are not allowed to patent a plant variety, so you are not allowed to patent Golden Delicious, an apple variety. This is prohibited. But if you like to have a patent on all apples resistant against a certain pathogen, this is totally clear. So if your patent is covering not one variety but 1,000 varieties, this is still allowed. And still, these technological processes are patentable. So this has led, as you see, around the year 2000 to an explosion of patents on plants. So here, this graph includes also GMOs. And you see the upper line, the PCT, the red line, these are so-called patent applications at the UN level, where you could apply, but the patents are always granted on national level. But this shows there has been a big race since the year 2000 of these patents. And maybe more important, there is also a race on patents on conventionally bred plants. And I will come back to this. So not only GMOs are patented today, but more and more plants which are maybe issued from crossing and selection. What does it mean for farmers? So this is different in all countries. In Europe, the restriction by a patent on a plant and the plant variety right is the same. So if a plant is patented, farmers are not allowed to exchange it, to sell it, and farm-safe seeds are restricted heavily. But a big difference is that breeders can no longer freely use patented plants. In all plant variety protection acts, all these the acts of, I said, India or Indonesia, so non-UPOV plant variety protection acts, as well as UPOV, there is a so-called breeder's exemption, where a breeder has free access to a protected plant. This means if Gordana has bred a new potato variety and I am another breeder, I'm totally free to use Gordana's variety, and as long as I'm doing crossings for creating a new variety, I don't have to ask Gordana and I don't have to pay her. I'm totally free. Nevertheless, there is also a big control on imports. I just show you a very simple patent, and this is the patent claim. So this is the core of the patent. And this patent claim says, I patent a process for the production of a broccoli with an increased amount of glucosinolate, and I do this by crossing a white brassica with a selected hybrid, and then I select all the, I'm crossing the broccoli with another breeding line of a broccoli, and then I'm selecting the ones which have high levels. So it's very, very easy. Nevertheless, this patent have been granted, although you see it was a process and this was not patentable, but then there was a back and forth, it was already in the shops. But then, there have been a lot of patents. This is a patent, we have made an opposition against it. This was a pepper which is against, again, the white fly. It's a pathogen which is a problem for the pepper industry. And what Syngenta did in this case is they went to Wageningen, to the Dutch gene bank. They collected all the wild peppers existing in the gene bank. They have screened the accession. They found one accession which has a resistance against the white fly. They have, through crossing and selection, in a way transferred this resistance to a commercializable pepper, and then asked for a patent on all peppers resistant against the white fly, and this patent has been granted. So you see, that's what we call a native trait. This, in our sense, was never an invention. This was, in the best case, a discovery. But this kind of patents are granted today. But the opposition is growing. We have not only farm organization, we see more and more breeders' organization which are resistant against these patents. Because breeders say we need access to the genetic diversity. And if already today, even material in the gene bank is restricted for further access for breeding, that's a catastrophe, that's a problem. And therefore, there is a big opposition against these patents today in Europe, and we hope in some years that there is maybe a change again in law. I switch a little bit. Today we have still a problem that also the discussion what is an essentially biological method is still disputed. You see, the European Patent Office say a random mutagenesis is not essentially biological. For me, this is this is crazy. As long as it's done in your breeder's garden, it seems to be technological, even if it's only from sunlight. But this kind of plants are still patented in Europe, also patents on gene sequences. And this leads to a lot of problems. The so-called Jordan virus is a big problem for the tomato industry. It's a pathogen which is very aggressive. And you see here, these are about 20 patents patenting a resistance against this virus on tomatoes. You see, on chromosome 11 even you have alone 10 different patents. So now if a breeder likes to do some breeding work on a tomato resistance against this Jordan virus, and maybe he finds this resistance, I don't know, but if he has finally such a resistant tomato, he would need to double check through a DNA analysis if his new resistant tomato is in contradiction with one of these 20 patents. This is impossible, an incredible work, and this leads what we call to a patent thicket. So it's very clear that these patents are rather a restriction for innovation, and they are not anymore a promotion of innovation. Just another example on this, exactly one of these patents on tomato. So this was I think a Dutch company, and again what they went to a gene bank and they screened a lot of wild tomato plants. So not Solanum lycopersicum, which is our tomato we are using, but Solanum peruvianum, Solanum cholense, and so on. And they found in an accession from Peru the resistance. They crossed it and now have a patent on this native trait. We think we need urgently to change this, if not we have a big problem. An organization which is working on this issue is No Patents on Seeds, a European NGO coalition, where also the organization I'm working for, ProSpecieRara, is engaged. And you also find more information in English and German on this website. That's, I think, my last slide. It's about the interaction. So I think what I tried to show you today is that intellectual property rights either by patents or by plot variety rights, have a big impact on the whole agricultural structure and chain. So they have an impact on the breeder, because patents are restricting the breeder's access to genetic diversity. But certainly they have a very big impact on the farmers. The farmer's right to save, use, exchange, and sell rights. This is a farmer's right which is enshrined in the UN Declaration of Patents, is limited by both of these intellectual property rights heavily. Finally, this will have an impact on the consumers, because if farmers are not allowed anymore to produce this genetic diversity, consumers also will have less choice, maybe have to pay a higher price. And this will also have an impact on biodiversity, because as we have heard, the farm-managed seed system is so crucial to produce agrobiodiversity. And if the functioning of the farmer-managed seed system is restricted, we will have a negative impact of the biodiversity we all need for our future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, it's really important to show how the UPOV and can be danger for our seed system. For example, Bosnia and Herzegovina entered in 2017, I think. We tried many years before that to explain that is not good. We try to although we have both entity national program for plant genetic resources protection, but there wasn't awareness in ministry at all level why we asked to stop with UPOV ratification before we sold seed saving in the country, but we didn't succeed. So we are not member of treaty, that is.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very important for me because we are members of UPOV. Serbia is the member 1901. I have a question. I understood that UPOV follows the national legislation before the country is a member, but when the country is already a member of UPOV and then signed the international treaty, which is also legally binding, do you know example where international treaty helped the country to change something and to have argument with UPOV that benefit sharing is an option, or exchange of seeds and so on? Is it possibility to use international treaty as a fact that can change the legislation and that the country doesn't fall short from the UPOV, if you understand what?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, should I? Yeah, I do. If not, I forget. If you allow,
it's better question by question.
Yeah.
Please.
So, different than UPOV, the treaty does not check any law. If you ratify and you become a member of the FAO treaty. So, treaty will never tell you to change any law to become a member. But what we have developed in the last years is so-called some guidance on farmers' rights. And there is a tool of best practices and options. And these options, I think it's at least said, written down, that you should check also your intellectual property rights in order to implement the farmers' rights as defined in the treaty. But this is, I would say, an invitation, because also the farmers' rights article in the treaty has, I have to say, a quite weak wording. It's much stronger in the UN declaration. So nobody will tell you that it is not coherent. A lot of European states, we are totally fine. We are a member of the treaty. We are a member of UPOV, and we think it's mutual supportive. So they try to build up this kind of argument. I think a very interesting case has happened in Honduras. Honduras developed a plant variety protection law which is in line with UPOV, and here the Supreme Court said it's against the Constitution, because the Constitution also needs to follow these international obligations. And the court said it's against UNDROP, so the United Declaration of Peasants, it's against the treaty, and therefore it's against our Constitution, and therefore the law was not valid in Honduras and has never came into force. But this is a kind of a unique decision, but it shows we should use it certainly, especially when we are maybe reviewing the laws. You see, in a lot of countries, the plant breeders' rights and even the patent law have been here before farmers' rights have been defined in the UN Declaration or in the treaty. But now the time has changed. So for any future revision, we should be very clear, hey, now we have new international obligations. We need to be taken into account. And so I hope that in any future revision, there will be a better implementation of farmers' rights. And even if Serbia, which is a member of UPOV 91, would have a revision of their law, in a way, you would be free to do it. Here, UPOV would not be able to interact and to prohibit to you, even if you would allow farmers' rights going further than what is allowed on the UPOV 91, as we did in Switzerland.
Perfect. Thank you. Mukabat, please, you have a question.
Во-первых, очень большое спасибо за очень важную, очень интересную презентацию. Я хотела сказать, Таджикистан присоединился к ЮПОВ, но не является полноправным членом ЮПОВ. Но однако сам ЮПОВ утвердил, что так как Таджикистан принял закон об охране сортов, это соответствует. Однако меня волнует то, что неформальная система семеноводства, как обстоят дела. Здесь у меня не столько вопрос, сколько комментарий или рассуждения. В течение еще советских времен, раньше было, по словам академика Вавилова, Таджикистан является один из 8 центров происхождения культурных растений. Однако во весь советский период было централизованное государственное развитие семеноводства, государство регулировало, обеспечивало семена. Это один. Другой, после распада Советского Союза у нас очень много международных организаций были, но если это была помощь, но однако их не волновало, они всегда обеспечивали семенами, не думая. И что я вижу в результате, наши фермеры, дыхканы, можно сказать, утеряли эти навыки, знания или отношения к сохранению семян. К великому сожалению, они даже привыкли в течение многих лет, нам ООН дает, нам Агахан дает или другие UNDP бесплатно. Это нас очень волнует. Тем не менее, мы попытаемся развивать где-то в далеких горных кишлаках, труднодоступных, найти фермеров, которые все-таки они верны семенам. Все-таки мы нашли где-то в очень труднодоступных. Но попытаемся. Но эти законы, законодательства, на мой взгляд, очень сложно понимать, очень интересно. Мы тоже занимаемся, мне очень интересно, очень трудно людям, министерствам или сельхозакадемии понимать, насколько это важно, чтобы они осознавали. Мы очень хотим, чтобы неформальная система семеноводства, мы создаем банки семян, основанные сообщества, эти работы начат. ЮНДРОП, Таджикистан проголосовал, но 19 и 20 статьи ЮНДРОПа в нашем национальном законодательстве не отражены. Поэтому у нас очень сложно, но тем не менее мы не теряем надежду. Мы попытаемся, чтобы воссоздать, возродить древнюю таджикскую культуру по сохранению семян, по сохранению агробиоразнообразия. Очень медленно, но делаем свое дело. Спасибо большое.
When I'm listening to you, because I just met the director of the Vavilov Institute a half a year ago. And I don't know if you are already doing it or if you have tried to do, but I think it would always be very interesting to, in a way, repatriate, to bring the seeds back which have been collected to the fields of the farmers. And next week I will be in the negotiations of the FAO treaty for the revision of this multilateral system. And we will also have a session where we will speak to make it clear that farmers have the right to access again also all these gene banks, even if it's not, if you know, you see, often seed banks are seen as this commercial gene bank, these national gene banks are often seen as a provider for seeds for companies, but they should also be seen as a provider for seeds for farmers. Now, clearly, they will not send you 100 kilo to plant in your field, but some samples, so you're able to multiplicate and to test again and to make tests. And so I just would encourage all of us to use also these gene banks to get back the varieties and the diversity which were in our fields many years ago and have been now, let's say, secured at least in the gene banks. And I hope it is possible, and if not, please tell me, because we are working on it also internationally, that seed banks really are opening, also the national gene banks are opening for farmers.
Thank you, François. I just would like to add, if you would have possibility, we tried on the regional European consultation, we put in our minutes one line about support for formal and informal seed system, but it is deleted and changed in after general for the revision of the second global plan of action for plant genetic resources. So if we just should keep in mind that there is also possibility through the different fora to be active. The next is Carolina from FAO. Please, Carolina, then Aida and Mariam.
Okay, I will try to be short because I know you're short in time. There are two things. I don't know, François, if you mentioned your presentation, I couldn't follow the whole presentation, but one step that we also have in Central Asia is especially in Uzbekistan now, because they are joining the World Trade Organization. They are become a full member of the WTO, so the negotiation is in place. One of the requests that the country has received is to join POS9. So this is like, it's a kind of a condition that they are putting for the country to join. The negotiations are very tough, as we know, and for the country it's important to become member. So just to show that UPOV, they have so many arms and they go so, like, they are very powerful threat, and it's very difficult for us to find ways. I cannot go into details because the negotiations are secret, like they are confidential, but yeah, there was a lot of concerns from the government regarding that. Let's see how things go. And I would like to also give some updates on Tajikistan, and this may be a good news for everybody. Again, we also need to understand, maybe for François, this is something that is important for you in this region. Unfortunately, the negotiation and the space that civil society has when it comes to governmental discussion is very limited. Some countries more than others, but Tajikistan especially, is not a country that really promotes civil society participation and dialogue, and you know that. But we are changing the seeds law in Tajikistan. The new law should be approved in the next 2-3 weeks, and it is a very good way. Anna Kansheva, she's not here today, but she was also involved. She's from my team, and it's a result of a very strong project that has focused on agrobiodiversity. And some of you knows about the project, some of you don't. But it's a project that we managed to establish 17 farmer seed banks throughout the whole country. Again, this is led by the government, so the civil society aspect, when you come to the civil society movement, is not so strong. but we are bringing the seeds back to these communities. And we are also working with the Institute of Genetics in the country, and we have now a list of the seeds they would like to do the repatriation. So we are also working with this. The project is ending in 3 months, and we are very sad about that because there's so much else to do. We are trying to get additional funds for that. But yeah, so even being part of the UPOV, we are making flexibilities for the seeds, farmer seed system for this part of exchange. I think the way that we are doing is like we are not informing the UPOV that we are changing the process, and eventually they will discover, but then things are really happening. I don't know. And the other point is that these changes are being proposed by the Committee of Environmental Protection, which is the Ministry of Environmental. So we are not dealing with this change under the Ministry of Agriculture, but the Ministry of Environment. And why is because in many Central Asia countries, the power of the ministries are not so associated with the agenda, but with the person who is leading, like the minister or the chairperson. And in Tajikistan, the chairperson for SAP is a very strong person. So he has a lot of impact on the agenda. So yeah, I will try to, I know I have a presentation eventually in some of the training. Maybe I can ask Anna to help me and put together some of the changes we are going to have in the Tajikistan law and kind of give a pathway on how we did it. Can be interesting for other countries. Sorry, I was way too long, but I will stop now.
Да, я хочу поблагодарить Франсуа за такую замечательную презентацию и очень супер важную для нас. Вот наша организация тоже работает именно с женщинами, семеноводами, и у нас создана сеть семеноводов, хранителей овощных семян, и в данный момент она объединяет более 700 фермеров, мелких фермеров. Вот. И за уже почти 10-летний опыт у нас были неодноразовые, много раз мы пытались работать с нашим министерством, чтобы включить в наше законодательство такое понятие, как фермерская система семеноводства. Да, вот поэтому то, что вы сказали, очень важно для нас, и те изменения и тот, который происходит в Европе, очень важно для нас, потому что наше министерство на уровне сотрудников понимает, насколько это важно. Особенно доступ к семенам. У нас важность этого вопроса поднялась после ковида, потому что Кыргызстан практически импортирует все семена овощных культур, и даже пшеницу и так далее, да, есть многие семена импортируются, и поэтому после ковида наше правительство поняло, насколько важно иметь собственные семена. Поэтому сейчас предполагаются очень разные мероприятия по поддержке семеноводов, но она идет по традиционной официальной системе семеноводства, больше такой коммерческого, индустриального семеноводства. И нам бы хотелось, чтобы в определении нашего закона о семенах была включена такая дефиниция, такое определение, как фермерская система семеноводства. Если у вас есть какой-то опыт или практика, потому что наши представители Минсельхоза сказали, предложите, пожалуйста, страну, развитую страну, которая это уже использует и которая имеет хороший позитивный эффект на экономику и на мелких фермеров. Мы будем рады рассмотреть такой вариант и, может быть, включить наше законодательство.
For me, I work on the seed system since 1996 when we started working on local agricultural biodiversity, because we saw that in the Soviet time they were restricted, and after Soviet time, even in scientific research centers, they were losing their collections, and we started reintroduction of those crops to the farmers' fields, and this was allowed because we didn't have at that time any kind of regulations. We even held different workshop seminars together with government on possibility of joining earlier version of since 1997 to joining earlier versions of UPOV, but it didn't happen. Finally, we joined the UPOV 1991. But only, but still there is a type of gap or in understanding of decision makers, how to implement that in the country, and that we actually do not have any control until now, almost. And that still allows us to continue our work. Even now I am in one of the regions, Samtskhe-Javakheti, where we exactly invited farmers to exchange seeds, local seeds of vegetables. Before we used to work on grain crops, and the main the support for doing our work was conventional on biological diversity we are part of, and also we managed to include in our biodiversity action plan, National Biodiversity Action Plan, protection of agricultural biodiversity. So within this scope, we somehow protected farmers to continue working on the local agricultural biodiversity. But now our government is getting more and more totalitarian, and also there is control on everything. Even new laws are introduced to control many different aspects of our lives, and also maybe also seeds will be taken into consideration. Therefore, my question will be, we need somehow to strengthen farmers' rights. So the UNDROP is one of the instruments that we can use, but maybe you can propose something or type of steps how we can work to balance in this situation, balance farmers' rights against UPOV 91. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. So please, François, you
thank you very much.
also for comments.
So first of all, I would invite the organizers to share my email with all the participants, and I send you now the email for which I use for APBREBES. So that's the organization I work for on plant breeders' rights. I just put it in the chat. So please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions. So I'm here to support you. I always promise this, and maybe sometimes my time is limited, but maybe it could be done very fastly by myself. So please, if you are interested further deep into this, as I said, for ProSpecieRara, I'm also working a lot on the FAO plant treaty. I'm since 10 years in the working group for the revision of the multilateral system of the plant treaty. So please, if you have any question, reach out to me, and I will try what I could do. I think because also I think question by Aido and Mariam went in this direction. So because time is limited, please join out, please reach out, and I will try my best. Sometimes maybe you have to wait, maybe you need to send me a reminder, but please do so.
Thank you for all. Thank you, Aida, really for this great initiative, and Carolina for support to our activities in Eastern Europe, Balkan, Caucasus and Central Asia region. We will see in 15 days, and I wish you all the best. See you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you once again for this.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, François.
До свидания, уважаемые участники.
До свидания.